This year we've all been treated to lessons mostly in how powerless we are, how much things are not really in our control, how much we fear and what we fear, and how little power and control we feel over those things. Over the last few years, I've frequently spoken about the Stoics, and given the state of uncertainty, fear, anguish, and depression that so many of us face in response to the ongoing crisis and all the economic consequences and everything like that, I thought it would be a great idea to look at the Stoics and get some advice from ancient times. So we need to have a closer look at the Stoic philosophy of indifference and see how that helps us deal with this kind of world. For those who've never been exposed to Stoic philosophy before, indifference can be quite a provocative word. And indeed, of all the terms that Stoics use and all the concepts, it is certainly the most provocative, but of course the most misunderstood. The word indifference, as used today, tends to mean a kind of carelessness and carelessness, not really caring at all for other things. That's not really what the Stoics meant. They meant to give us an understanding of how to know the difference between what we're in control of and what we're not, and how to handle those things that we're not the most in the most control of. So the great Stoics tell us that indifference is about indifference to external things, things like wealth, things like pain, winning or losing, even our hopes and dreams. The Stoics say, be indifferent to everything. And it is true that the more that you hear that, the more it seems that the Stoics are telling us not to care. They are telling us that these things like our hopes and dreams, etc., don't really matter. And at worst, they're telling us that we people shouldn't really care about anything at all. And in that reading, the philosophy of indifference could certainly lead to a philosophy of selfishness. But that can only be because of a misunderstanding of what the Stoics were really trying to say. The real point that the Stoics are trying to make was that we need an inner strength. The word is indifference, but a better word for us moderns might be a kind of an inner strength that we're referring to. The point really was that we need to be strong enough so that we don't need to be in control of things or for things to go a particular way for us. Certainly, the Stoics knew that, for example, you're better off if you're rich than poor in the world that we're in, even if you're tall than short. But ultimately, the point of Stoicism was that effectively that's fate, and the Stoic was indifferent to fate, or whatever fate dealt us, because we're not in control of those things. Because the Stoic was strong enough to make good out of any situation. It's not at all about not expecting an outcome, not having an ambition towards a really good outcome. It's really that kind of strength that says, in the end, whatever the outcome may be, I will be indifferent to that. I might have a preference, but I don't really need a preference. I might prefer to be rich than poor, but if I don't have a preference, it means I will handle whatever it is that I face, whatever it is that I am. It's about an inner strength that says whatever my preferences might be, I accept that that is not what I'm in control of. And so I will accept with strength and with equanimity whatever comes to me that I'm actually not in control of. So there are three types of things, or there are three types of experiences that we have, three types of events in our lives. There are those things that benefit us, the good stuff. There are those things that don't benefit us, the bad stuff. And there are those things which are neither good or bad, but which depend on other things. And even though those other things are not in our control, and we have to engage with those things all the time, what is in control is how we deal with those external stimuli that we get. We might prefer to have a life only filled with good things, only filled with things that we are in charge of or that meet our expectations. So for example, I have an ambition, I define it as good, and I go out and meet it. But what I really require is the understanding that I may do that and I may go out and need that, but I have to deal with what comes back to me. I have to decide how to respond to what comes back to me. And in order to respond, I need to make a value judgment. Is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? Or is that something that requires me to be indifferent? Requires me to be indifferent also gives us the clue that this is not about some kind of callous nature that says I don't feel for the things that happen outside of me, but rather it's a strategy of responding to and handling those kind of things that are outside of us. We are constantly faced with decisions about which of those categories something falls into, and in truth, deciding between them and following on from that is pretty much a delicate balancing act. It is, of course, way easier said than done. Donald Robertson, author of the amazing book How to Think Like a Roman Emperor, says that for Stoics, external things are not good or bad in the strongest sense. They don't make our souls better or worse, or affect our fulfillment in life. What matters ultimately is the use we make of them, good or bad, virtuous or vicious. That's the basic principle that says the only thing that really matters is how we respond, and therefore there are no such things as good or bad, but only our response is such. As we go about our lives, we encounter stuff, we encounter the external world all the time, and as we do so and get our impression of the situation, is what the Stoics say, that we receive impressions all the time, our reactions and our responses, and then we have to decide whether the stimulus is good or bad, or true or false, or good or evil. If we can't determine that, we need to suspend our judgment and categorize it as indifferent. If we can't tell whether something is good or bad, it is therefore indifferent. But that does not mean that we shouldn't have an interest in it or that it's unimportant in some way. It means that we need to respond with a kind of equanimity that says, until I know otherwise, I will treat it as indifferent. And indifferent, as you can hear, is then better described as neutral. It is, in essence, neither good or bad, or most importantly, with respect to me, since I have no power or control over it. It is therefore indifferent. It's indifferent to me. It's not aimed at me. It's not trying to hurt me. I must accept this indifference and ultimately, for myself, suspend my judgment on it. Doesn't matter now whether it's good or bad. It's interesting to see how Epictetus, the great Stoic who was the teacher of Marcus Aurelius, defines this. He says, material things are indifferent, but how we handle them is not indifferent. How then is one to maintain the constant and tranquil mind, and therefore the careful spirit, which is not random or hasty? Material things are indifferent, but how we handle them is not indifferent. How then is one to maintain the constant and tranquil mind, and therewith the careful spirit, which is not random or hasty? He goes on, you can do it if you imitate those who play dice. Counters and dice are indifferent. How do I know what is going to turn up? My business is to use what does turn up with diligence and skill. In like manner, this is the principal business of life. Distinguish between things, weigh them one against the other, and say, external things are not in my power. My will is my own. Where am I to seek what is good and what is evil? Within me, among my own possessions. You must never use the word good or evil to benefit or injury, or any such word in connection with other men's possessions. Good or evil, of course, then, is only our own moral judgment and our own moral behavior. And those things outside of ourselves, which don't belong to us, we can't judge as such. It's also important, his metaphor of the dice, which is so great, because he says, ultimately, he's talking about a game of chance. And he says, to win a game of chance, or to just play it, you've got to accept that you're not in control of the fall of the dice. That does not make you run away or accuse someone else. It makes you realize, given what I've got, the random fall of the dice, I've got to play as skillfully as possible. And that simple little metaphor applies to pretty much everything. He says, men are disturbed not by things themselves, but by the views which they take on those things. If we allow ourselves to become upset by external things, he says we should examine the judgments we are placing on those things rather than those things themselves. And certainly the response to the lockdown and the whole crisis, if you look at yourself, if you look at everyone on social media, while the events of the epidemic, the governmental responses, everything that people are doing, certainly seem to get people very upset, and people make judgments, they're right about that, they're wrong about that, they should do this and they shouldn't do that. We are allowing ourselves to become upset by these external things. So he says, rather look at yourself and ask yourself the question, why do I judge it as that? What is the good or bad to me in this situation now? In the situation I'm in? How can I find my own good or evil in my response, my judgmentalness? And where can I find, of course, my more indifferent approach that allows me to understand viruses, lockdowns, whatever they may be, are neither good nor evil, but my response to them is what is good or evil. Masks, vaccinations, in themselves are neither good or evil. They are things. You can't even judge the intention of a person behind them as good or evil, because you don't have power over that, and therefore your judgment isn't even valid, because you're not in control of that. Who are you to say? How do you know? Rather, you can say, my response, good, evil, indifferent. And indifferent is the understanding that I don't actually have control. Of course, to a large extent, we are talking about material things. And Epictetus acknowledges that on the one hand, we aspire towards material things and have ambitions which require us to live in the material world and master it and gain from it. At the same time, we're being asked not to judge and accept when things aren't working and be indifferent. So he says, indeed, it is difficult to unite and combine these qualities. The diligence of a man who devotes himself to material things, and the constancy of one who disregards them. Yet it is not impossible to reconcile these things. Otherwise, he says, it would be impossible to be happy. We act very much as if we were on a voyage at sea. What can I do? I can choose the helmsman, the sailors, the day, the moment, the destination, and off we go. Then a storm arises. What do I care? I have fulfilled my task. Now another has to act, the helmsman. Suppose even the ship goes down. What do I have to do then? I do only what is in my power. Drowning, if drown I must, without fear, not crying out or accusing heaven, for I know that what is born must also perish. For I am not immortal, but a man, a part of the universe, as an hour is part of the day. Like the hour, I must be here, and like the hour, I must pass away, by drowning, or by fever, or by some such means, I must needs pass away. The metaphor of the boat is a very powerful metaphor. We engage in that behavior, in fact, whenever we put ourselves on public transport. So imagine yourself in an aeroplane, and you have chosen the plane, the airline company. Effectively then, you've chosen the pilot, or you have admitted that the airline company are in a better position to choose the pilot than you are. You're not in control of that, and you don't know about pilots. You don't know about flying planes. You accept what you don't know and don't try comment on it and engage on it. That itself a very important principle in Stoicism. Then you're flying along and you hit a crisis. The panic and fear that we feel is often because we feel ourselves to be not in control. And we're afraid of the not in control. We forget that we don't have to feel fear. We've already done all the control bits that we could. We chose the plane, we chose the destination, we chose what we wanted to do. Now we have to assume that the rest is up to them. What's happening to the plane is not in our control. Epictetus steps in there to say, what is in your control there is dying. So why don't you accept that graciously? Why don't you look to the good within over there? And instead of going down in fear and anguish by not being in control, control the one thing you are in control of. But more than that, he's saying, accept that you are going to die. One of the biggest issues in accepting what you're not in control of is accepting that you are going to die. To the modern ear, that often sounds morbid. But maybe in the last year we've begun to understand that that is something that is outside of our control, although that was always true. I've said before, the Stoics often carry around some item, like a medallion, to remind themselves that they're going to die, and follow the philosophy of live today as if you're going to die. Doesn't mean live as a hedonist. It means take control of the things that you are in control of and live your best life possible. Show the ones you love that you love them. Do the things that give you satisfaction and love and that kind of thing, because you might be dead tomorrow. So that's also behind that philosophy that says I must accept that I'm going to die. Because it's an absolute fact, no doubt about it. If I accept that, then I can let go of all the things I'm not in control of, such as my death. Epictetus then goes on to say, how is it that some external things are described as natural and some as unnatural? It is because we regard ourselves as detached from the rest of the universe. For the foot, for instance, I shall say, it is natural to be clean. But if you take it as a foot and not as a detached thing, it will be fitting for it to walk in the mud and tread upon thorns, and sometimes to be cut off for the sake of the whole body, or else it will cease to be a foot. We must hold exactly the same view of ourselves. What are you? A man, human. If you regard human as a detached being, it is natural for him to live to old age, to be rich, to be healthy. But if you regard him as a man and a part of a larger whole, that whole makes it fitting that at one moment you shall fall ill, at another go on a voyage and risk your life, and at another be at your wit's end, and if it may be, die before your time. Why then are you indignant? Do you not know that just as the foot spoke of, if viewed apart, will cease to be a foot, then so you will cease to be a man. For what is a man? A part of a city. He says that since we are natural creatures, it makes the best sense to choose what is natural, and the ability to choose what is natural comes with the territory of being a natural creature. He says a natural creature would most logically choose what is natural to them, what God created him to be. So he says, if I really knew that it was ordained for me to be ill, I should wish to be ill. For the foot too, if it had a mind, would wish to get muddy. For instance, why do ears of corn grow? Is it not that they may ripen in the sun? And if they are ripened, is it not that they must be reaped? For they are not things apart. If they really had feelings, then ought they to pray never to be reaped at any time? Similarly, know that you are cursing men when you pray for them not to die. It is like a prayer for corn not to ripen, not to be reaped. But we men, being creatures whose fate it is to be reaped, are also made aware of this very fact, that we are destined for reaping. And so we are angry, because we don't know who we are. Epictetus goes on, we bear what comes upon us with tears and groans, and we call it circumstances. What do you mean by circumstances, fellow men? If you mean by circumstances what surrounds you, everything is circumstances. If you use the term in the sense of hardships, and we generally do, how is it a hardship that what was born should be destroyed? The instrument of destruction is a sword or a wheel or the sea or a fever or a tyrant. What matters it to you by which road you go to the afterlife? All roads are the same. There's only one thing for you to remember: the distinction between what is yours and what is not yours. Never claim anything that is not yours. We control our actions, our responses, and how we handle the adversities that we face. But living a life of virtue starts with us, not with external things. we have the ability to distinguish what is and what is not within our own control, to live in accordance with our virtues, to properly examine and apply our value judgments to the situations that we face. Remembering this will lead to supreme power over our future, because we have taken the necessary steps to live virtuously. As always, no shortage of wisdom from the ancient Stoics. I'll be back next week at the same time.